The great hall of the Galactic Council was filled with worried voices. Creatures from 40 different worlds sat in their special chairs, all looking at the big screen in front of them. Ambassador Zextar from the Vrylon Empire stood at the center, his blue skin shining under the bright lights. His forearms moved as he spoke, and his voice carried fear that made everyone listen. "What you are about to see," Zextar said, "should not be possible." The screen came to life, showing a rocky planet covered in gray dust. Mining machines sat broken and scattered across the ground like toys thrown by an angry child. Deep claw marks cut through metal walls. Dark stains covered the ground where workers had tried to run. Then the camera moved and gasps filled the hall. Shadow Maws walked through the mining camp. These creatures stood 12 feet tall on 4 powerful legs. Their black scales moved like liquid metal, catching the dim light of the planet's red sun. Each paw had claws as long as swords, sharp enough to cut through steel. Their mouths opened to show teeth that dripped with acid, and their yellow eyes glowed like fire in the darkness. For 3,000 years, every species in the galaxy had feared Shadow Maws. They were death on 4 legs. They hunted in packs and left nothing alive. Entire colonies had been lost when just one Shadow Maw appeared. The smart thing to do was run away and never look back. But the humans were not running. A man walked between the giant creatures like he was taking a walk in a park. He wore simple work clothes and boots covered in dust. His name was Jake Morrison, though the aliens watching did not know this yet. He moved slowly and calmly, his hands at his sides. When he reached the biggest Shadow Maw, he did something that made every alien in the council hall freeze in terror. He reached out and touched the creature's head. The Shadow Maw, which could have torn him apart in 1 second, lowered its massive head and pressed against Jake's hand. Its eyes closed like a happy cat. Jake smiled and scratched behind what looked like ears, though no one was sure if Shadow Maws really had ears. Other humans worked nearby. A woman with red hair was checking the Shadow Maw's giant paws, looking for cuts or injuries. Another man was feeding chunks of meat to a smaller Shadow Maw that wagged its tail like an earth dog. Children played with young Shadow Maws, throwing balls that the creatures would catch and bring back. The mining operation was working better than anyone had ever seen. The Shadow Maws used their natural digging skills to tunnel deep into the ground. They could smell rare metals that human machines missed. They worked without getting tired, and they protected the humans from other dangerous creatures that lived on the planet. "This video was taken 3 days ago," Zextar said, his voice shaking, "on Kepler 442b. The human colony there has been working with Shadow Maws for 6 months. They have mined more rare crystals in that time than our best teams could extract in 5 years." The hall erupted in noise. The bug-like Cathara clicked their sharp mouths in disbelief. The crystal beings called Nexari hummed sounds of confusion that hurt everyone's ears. The fish-like Aquari splashed in their water tanks, and the rock creatures from Titan Prime ground their stone teeth together. "Impossible," shouted Council Leader Morden, a giant creature that looked like a walking tree. "Shadow Maws cannot be tamed. They are pure killers. Every species knows this. Perhaps the humans are using some kind of mind control," suggested Representative Clixra, whose snake-like body coiled around her floating chair. "Or drugs. Or maybe they have changed the creatures with their science." "We checked everything," Zextar replied. "No drugs, no mind control, no genetic changes. The humans simply talk to them, and the Shadow Maws listen." The screen showed more impossible things. Jake Morrison was sitting on the ground next to the big Shadow Maw, sharing his lunch. The creature ate an apple from Jake's hand, being very careful not to hurt him with its sharp teeth. When Jake laughed at something, the Shadow Maw made a sound that almost seemed like laughing too. "How long have humans been in our galaxy?" asked Elder Voxtim, whose species had been keeping records for longer than most others had existed. 57 years since first contact," answered the Council's computer. "They joined the Outer Rim Trading Agreement 23 years ago. They have been mostly quiet, setting up colonies on planets other species did not want." "What planets?" Mordun wanted to know. "Worlds with dangerous wildlife," the computer replied. "Planets we marked as too risky for normal settlement." A cold feeling spread through the hall. Every species there had lost people to dangerous creatures on unexplored worlds. It was just a fact of life in the galaxy. Some planets were too deadly to live on, no matter how rich they might be in resources. But humans had been living on those worlds. And not just surviving, they were thriving. The screen changed to show another planet. This one was covered in thick jungle and flying creatures. The size of small ships moved through the sky. These were void stalkers, hunters that could fly through space and had destroyed many cargo ships. But in the jungle below, humans rode on the backs of young void stalkers, moving through the trees like they had been doing it their whole lives. Another planet appeared. This one was mostly ocean, and in the deep water, massive tentacles moved like underwater snakes. Cloud serpents lived here, creatures whose poison could kill a full-grown Nexari in seconds. But human swimmers moved among them without fear, and the serpents seemed to be showing them hidden underwater caves full of valuable pearls. "We need answers," Morden declared, his wooden voice booming through the hall. "These humans have power that could change everything. They could make the dangerous world safe. They could solve problems we have had for thousands of years. Or they could be lying to us," Clixra hissed. "Maybe they want to make us weak so they can take over." The debate went on for hours, but everyone agreed on one thing. They needed to understand how humans could do the impossible. A message was sent to Earth asking for a demonstration. The humans were invited to bring their creatures to a neutral space station, where everyone could see the truth. On Kepler 442b, Jake Morrison received a call from Captain Lisa Hayes of the Earthship Aurora. She told him about the Galactic Council's request. Jake looked around at his Shadow Maw friends who were resting in the shade after a long day of mining. "Think they're ready to meet the neighbors?" he asked the big Shadow Maw, whose name was Rex. Rex made a low rumbling sound that Jake had learned meant yes in Shadow Maw language. The creature's tail wagged slowly, and Jake knew that the galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place. Far away, on 40 different worlds, alien species wondered if everything they thought they knew about the universe was wrong. And for the first time in thousands of years, creatures that had been called monsters might finally have a chance to be understood. 3 weeks later, Space Station Harmony 7 was more crowded than it had ever been. Ships from 47 different worlds floated around the giant metal structure like moths around a light. Every major species in the galaxy had sent representatives to see something that should not exist. Captain Lisa Hayes stood in the main meeting room, looking out at the strangest audience she had ever seen. Giant tree-like beings sat next to creatures made of living crystal. Fish people floated in special water tanks while rock monsters stood as still as statues. Bug-like aliens clicked their mouths nervously, and snake people coiled around floating chairs. "Thank you all for coming," Lisa said into her translator device, which turned her words into sounds, colors, and smells that each species could understand. "I know this seems impossible, but I promise you will see the truth today." Next, to her stood Dr. Kevin Blake, a thin man with gray hair who had spent his life studying animals. He carried a small device that could show pictures in the air, and he looked as nervous as Lisa felt. "Before we show you anything," Kevin said, "let me explain something about humans. We are not special because we are strong or smart. We are special because of how we grew up." The air above Kevin's device filled with pictures of Earth. Green forests covered the planet and oceans sparkled blue under a yellow sun. Animals of every size and shape moved across the screen. Tiny mice ran through grass while giant elephants walked slowly through rivers. "For millions of years," Kevin continued, "humans lived with animals. We hunted together. We protected each other. We learned to understand each other without words." The pictures changed to show humans throughout history. Cave people sat around fires with wolves that would become dogs. Farmers worked in fields with horses and cows. Children played with cats that purred in their laps. Brave men and women worked with lions and tigers in places called zoos, teaching people that even dangerous animals could be friends. The alien audience watched in silence. Most of them had never seen anything like this. On their worlds, animals were either food or enemies. The idea of friendship between different species was new and strange. Now we will show you how this works, Lisa announced. But first I need everyone to step back, way back. The aliens moved quickly to the edges of the room. Some of them were already scared, and they had not even seen the demonstration yet. Large doors opened at the end of the room, and a special habitat rolled in, on wheels. It was made of clear, strong material that could stop plasma blasts. Inside the habitat, something moved in the shadows. Everyone could hear it breathing. Deep, slow breaths that sounded like wind in a cave. Yellow eyes appeared in the darkness, glowing like tiny suns. Then the creature stepped forward, and half the aliens in the room tried to run away. It was a young shadow maw named Luna. She was only 8 feet tall, much smaller than the adults, but still bigger than any human. Her black scales caught the light and seemed to drink it up. Her claws clicked on the metal floor as she paced back and forth. The spines on her back stood up and her mouth opened to show teeth that could bite through steel. Luna was scared and angry. She had been taken from a group of space pirates who were trying to sell her, and she did not trust anyone. Her growls filled the room with sound that made everyone's bones shake. The aliens pressed themselves against the walls. Some of the smaller ones hid behind the bigger ones. Even the bravest warriors in the room felt their courage melting away like ice in hot sun. But Jake Morrison walked toward the habitat like he was going to pet a friendly cat. "Easy, girl," Jake said in a soft voice as he opened the door and stepped inside. "I know you're scared. New place, new people, but you're safe now." Luna's growls grew louder. She showed her teeth and took a step toward Jake. Acid dripped from her mouth and hit the floor with a hissing sound. Her claws extended fully, ready to tear him apart. Jake did not run. He did not even look worried. Instead, he sat down on the floor and opened a small container. The smell of apples filled the air, sweet and fresh like a spring morning on Earth. "You hungry?" Jake asked, holding out a piece of apple. "I bet you haven't had anything good to eat in a while." Luna stopped growling. Her nose twitched as she smelled the fruit. She had never smelled anything like it before, but something about it made her mouth water in a good way instead of the scary way. Jake did not move toward her. He just sat there, holding the apple and talking in his calm, quiet voice. He told her about the farm where the apples grew, about the sunshine and rain that helped them get sweet. He talked about his friend Rex and how much Rex loved apples too. Slowly, very slowly, Luna's spines began to lower. Her claws pulled back into her paws. She took one careful step toward Jake, then another. The aliens watching could barely breathe, as the deadly creature moved closer to the human who seemed completely unafraid. Luna sniffed Jake's hand. She could smell the apple, but she could also smell something else. Something that made her feel less alone. Jake smelled like pack, like family, like someone who could be trusted. She took the apple gently between her huge teeth and ate it in one bite. Then she did something that made every alien in the room gasp in amazement. She lay down next to Jake and put her massive head in his lap. Jake smiled and scratched behind Luna's ears. "Good girl," he said. "See, we're going to be friends." But the demonstration was not over. More doors opened and more humans entered with different creatures. There was a pack of void stalkers, their wings folded as they walked on their strong legs. Cloud serpents slithered along the floor, their colorful scales shining like rainbows. Even a young titan beetle, its shell gleaming like polished armor, clicked its way into the room. Each human worked with their creature partner like they had been doing it for years. The void stalkers flew in perfect formation around their human trainer. The cloud serpents wrapped around their human friend's arms like living jewelry, careful not to let their poisonous skin touch him. The titan beetle let a small human girl ride on its back as it showed off how it could carry heavy objects. Dr. Kevin Blake stepped forward with his device showing brain scans. "This is what happens in a human brain when we meet a new animal," he explained. "We have special parts that help us understand how the animal feels. We can see if they are scared or angry or happy, even if they look completely different from us." The scans showed human brains lighting up like Christmas trees when the people looked at animals. Different colored areas became bright as the humans figured out what the creatures needed. But the most important thing, Kevin continued, is that the animals understand us too. They can see that we are not trying to hurt them. They can tell that we want to be friends. Ambassador Zextar stepped forward, his forearms shaking. This changes everything, he said. For thousands of years we have feared these creatures, we have lost entire colonies to them. But you make them into friends. Jake looked up from where he sat with Luna, who was now purring like a giant cat. They were never monsters, he said. They were just misunderstood. All they wanted was someone to care about them. The demonstration ended with all the humans and creatures working together to build something. The Void Stalkers carried materials through the air. The Shadow Maws dug holes with their claws. The Cloud Serpents used their flexible bodies to tie pieces together. The Titan Beetles lifted heavy parts into place. In just 20 minutes, they had built a beautiful garden with flowers from Earth, watered by a small fountain. It was a tiny piece of peace in the cold metal of the space station. The alien delegates stood in amazed silence. Everything they thought they knew about the universe had just changed. Creatures they had feared for centuries were capable of creation, not just destruction. And humans, these strange newcomers to the galaxy, were the key to unlocking this potential. As the meeting ended and the aliens returned to their ships, each carried the same thought. The galaxy had just become a much more interesting and hopeful place. And somewhere in the demonstration habitat, Luna fell asleep with her head still in Jake's lap, dreaming of apples and friendship. The biggest meeting hall on planet Nexus Prime was packed with the smartest beings in the galaxy. Scientists from every world had come to hear Dr. Kevin Blake explain how humans could do something that seemed like magic. The air buzzed with excitement and confusion as creatures with different types of brains all tried to understand the same mystery. Kevin stood at the front of the room, looking at an audience that would have scared most people. Giant thinking crystals hummed to themselves while floating brain creatures pulsed with colored lights. Multi-armed scientists from gas-giant worlds twisted their tentacles nervously, and rock-based life forms stood perfectly still like living statues. The secret is not in our technology, Kevin began, his words translated into dozens of different languages, light patterns, and chemical smells. The secret is in our history. Behind him, a huge screen showed pictures of early humans walking across African plains millions of years ago. These first people looked different from modern humans, but their eyes held the same intelligence and curiosity. My species evolved as hunters, Kevin explained. But not the kind of hunters you might think. We were not fast like the great cats or strong like the giant bears. We could not fly like birds or breathe underwater like fish. So we had to be clever. The pictures changed to show humans chasing large animals across vast grasslands. But instead of quick attacks, the humans followed the animals for hours, sometimes days. They walked and jogged at a steady pace, never getting tired, until the bigger animals collapsed from exhaustion. We call this persistence hunting, Kevin said. To do this, we had to understand the animals we hunted. We had to know when they were tired, when they were scared, when they might turn and fight. We had to read their body language like a book. Dr. Amy Foster, a woman with short black hair and kind eyes, stepped forward to join Kevin. She had spent months living with Jake Morrison and his Shadow Maw friends, watching how they interacted. But hunting was only part of the story, Amy said. Humans also learned to work with other animals. We made friends with wolves, and they became dogs. We partnered with horses to travel faster and carry heavy loads. We even learned to work with bees to get honey. The alien scientists leaned forward, their various eyes, sensors, and attention-gathering organs focused on Amy. This was the part they found hardest to believe. On most worlds, Amy continued, smart species either eat other animals or avoid them completely. You see other living things as food, danger, or nothing important, but humans learned to see them as possible partners. The screen showed brain scans that made the audience gasp in amazement. Human brains lit up with activity when looking at animals, but not in the parts that controlled fear or hunger. Instead, the areas that normally worked when humans looked at other humans became active. This is the key, Kevin said, pointing to the bright spots on the scan. When humans look at an animal, part of our brain treats it like another person. We try to understand what it is thinking and feeling. A crystalline scientist named Zarkex sent out a pattern of lights that translated as a question. But how can you understand creatures so different from yourselves? A shadow maw brain is nothing like a human brain. Amy smiled and showed a new set of brain scans. We have something called mirror neurons. These are special brain cells that fire both when we do something and when we watch someone else do the same thing. Most species only have mirror neurons for their own kind. Humans have them for almost everything that moves. She showed a video of Jake Morrison working with Rex, his giant shadow maw friend. As Jake reached out his hand, certain parts of his brain became active. When Rex moved his head toward Jake's hand, different parts of Jake's brain lit up as if Jake was also moving his head. Jake's brain is copying what Rex does, Amy explained. This helps him understand what Rex is feeling and what Rex might do next. It is like Jake can think a little bit like a shadow maw. The room erupted in excited discussions. Tentacled beings waved their arms while crystal creatures hummed in frequencies that hurt everyone's ears. Rock people ground their stone teeth together, which was how they showed surprise. But the biggest surprise was still coming. Amy showed a new video, this one taken with special equipment that could see heat and electrical activity. It showed Jake and Rex working together to dig a tunnel. But the amazing part was not what they were doing. It was what their brains were doing. "Look at this," Amy said, pointing to wavy lines that showed brain activity. Jake's brain pattern and Rex's brain pattern are almost the same. They are thinking together, like two parts of one mind. Dr. Blake stepped forward again. "We think this happens because shadow maws are also pack hunters, just like early humans. They have complex social groups and they need to work together to survive. When Jake acts like a pack leader, Rex's brain recognizes the pattern and responds. A fish-like scientist in a water tank sent out bubbles that translated as confusion. Are you saying the animals choose to follow humans?" "Exactly," Amy replied. "They are not being controlled or tricked. They recognize something familiar in human behavior. We act like the kind of leaders they instinctively want to follow." Kevin showed more examples. Cloud serpents were normally solitary creatures, but they had a mating ritual where they wrapped around each other in complex patterns. When humans moved their arms in similar patterns, the serpents saw it as a form of dance and wanted to join. Void stalkers lived in flocks with strict flying formations. When humans used hand signals that looked like wing positions, the void stalkers understood it as flight commands from a flock leader. Even Titan beetles, which seemed like simple insects, had complex social structures in their hives. They responded to humans who could mimic the chemical signals that their queens used to give orders. Every species we have worked with has some kind of social behavior, Kevin explained. Humans are good at recognizing these patterns and copying them. We become part of their social group instead of being outsiders they need to fear. An elderly scientist named Professor Vektul, whose species had been studying animal behavior for thousands of years, stood up slowly. His translator box wheezed as it converted his thoughts into words. "This explains many mysteries," he said. "We have always wondered why some creatures seem more intelligent when they are in groups. Perhaps they need social connections to reach their full potential." Amy nodded excitedly. "That is exactly what we think. These creatures are not just smart, they are socially smart. They need friends and family to be their best selves. When humans give them that social connection, they can do amazing things." The presentation ended with live video feeds from human colonies across the galaxy. On desert worlds, humans rode void stalkers through sandstorms to rescue stranded travelers. In deep ocean planets, teams of humans and cloud serpents explored underwater caves together. On mining asteroids, shadow maws and humans worked side by side to extract rare metals. But the most amazing feed came from a planet called New Eden, where Dr. Sarah Kim had started something incredible. She had brought together humans and creatures from 6 different worlds to build the first truly mixed-species city. Shadow maws dug the foundations while void stalkers carried materials from the sky. Cloud serpents helped with underwater construction, and Titan beetles moved heavy equipment. The city was beautiful, with buildings designed for both humans and their creature partners. There were pools for the cloud serpents, high towers for the void stalkers and strong tunnels for the shadow maws. Children played in parks where young creatures of all species learned together. "This is the future," Kevin said as the video ended. "Not humans controlling other species, but all species working together as equals. We have learned that intelligence comes in many forms, and friendship can cross any boundary." As the scientists left the meeting hall, each carried with them a new understanding of what was possible. The galaxy was full of creatures that had been misunderstood for thousands of years. Perhaps it was time to stop seeing them as monsters and start seeing them as neighbors. On New Eden, Sarah Kim watched the sunset with her friend Luna, a shadow maw who had become the first of her species to learn human language. Together, they planned tomorrow's work on the city that would prove that different species could not just live together, but thrive together. The age of cooperation had begun, and it was more wonderful than anyone had dared to dream. 6 months after the great demonstration, the galaxy looked completely different. Ships that had once carried weapons now carried humans and their creature friends to worlds that had been too dangerous to visit. Trade routes that pirates had, controlled for centuries, were now safe highways protected by the most unlikely guards anyone could imagine. Jake Morrison stood in his new office aboard the starship Harmony, looking out at a sight that still amazed him every day. 3 void stalkers flew alongside the ship, their massive wings catching starlight as they escorted a convoy of merchant vessels. These same creatures had once been the terror of space travelers, attacking ships and stealing cargo. Now they worked as protectors, getting paid in their favorite food and all the flying space they wanted. "Report from Sector 7, called out Commander Helen Wright from the bridge. Helen was a former military officer who had become the leader of the new interspecies peacekeeping force. She was tough and smart, but she had learned to be gentle too, because that was what worked with their new partners. "The Void Stalker Patrol stopped another pirate attack," Helen continued. "Third one this week. The pirates are starting to avoid that area completely." Jake smiled as he watched the Void Stalkers perform a victory loop, spinning through space like dancers celebrating a job well done. Their human partners on the ships below waved at them through the windows, and the creatures responded with happy chirping sounds that could be heard through the ship's radio. The success stories were coming in from everywhere. On the farming world of new series, Pete Collins had changed everything people thought they knew about growing food. His farm was now the most productive in 3-star systems, and it was all because of his partnership with creatures called burrowing titans. These massive worm-like beings had once been considered pests that destroyed crops by digging tunnels everywhere, but Pete had discovered that their tunnels created perfect water systems for plants. The titans could sense where plants needed water most, and their tunnels carried rain and irrigation to exactly the right places. "They are not destroying the crops," Pete had explained to amazed visitors. "They are helping the crops grow better than we ever could alone." Now Pete's farm fed 3 planets, and other farmers were learning his methods. The burrowing titans were happy too, because they got all the root vegetables they could eat and plenty of soft soil to dig in. But the most dramatic changes were happening in the disputed zones, areas of space where different species had been fighting for hundreds of years. Commander Helen had taken her mixed teams there, expecting to find war zones that would take years to fix. Instead, she found something surprising. Many of the fights were not really about territory or resources. They were about misunderstandings, with local creature populations that the warring species had never bothered to study. On the planet Kethvar, 2 species had been fighting over mining rights for 50 years. Both sides claimed the other was stealing their equipment and sabotaging their operations. Helen arrived with her team to find the real culprits, a family of crystal worms that lived deep underground. These creatures ate metal and had been taking pieces of mining equipment to build their nests. They were not trying to hurt anyone. They just thought the shiny metal pieces were perfect building materials. Once Helen's team established communication with the crystal worms, they worked out a deal. The mining companies would leave specific types of scrap metal for the worms, and in return, the worms would show them where the richest mineral deposits were hidden. The 50-year war ended in 3 days. Similar solutions were found across the disputed zones. Ancient territorial markers left by long-extinct creatures had been driving certain species crazy with territorial instincts they did not understand. Mating calls from deep space creatures had been interfering with navigation systems. Migration patterns of giant space-dwelling animals had been disrupting trade routes. All of these problems had simple solutions, once someone bothered to talk to the creatures involved, but not everyone was happy with the changes. The Corex Federation was a warrior species that believed in strength above all else. Their society was built on the idea that the strong should rule and the weak should serve. They saw the human approach as weakness that would make the entire galaxy soft and defenseless. "These humans are making us all weak," declared war leader Grixtal at a secret meeting of Corex military commanders. "They teach us to be friends with beasts instead of conquering them. This will destroy the natural order of things." The Corex began spreading messages throughout the galaxy, claiming that humans were using mind control to enslave other species. They said the creature partnerships were unnatural and dangerous. Some species, especially those that had always been suspicious of change, began to listen. Tensions grew when Corex ships started following human convoys, taking pictures and making threatening gestures. Several times, Corex vessels tried to scan human brains and creature brains looking for evidence of mind control devices. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. But instead of accepting the evidence, the Corex decided that human technology was just too advanced for them to detect. The situation exploded when a Corex strike force attacked the human training facility on Epsilon Eridani 3. 50 Corex warriors, in powered armor, landed on the planet, expecting to find enslaved creatures that would turn on their human masters the moment they were freed from mind control. The attack began at dawn, when most of the humans were still asleep. The Corex surrounded the main compound where Jake Morrison's team trained new human-creature partnerships. Their plan was simple: attack the humans and prove that the creatures would either run away or join the attackers once they were no longer being controlled. The first Corex soldier fired his plasma rifle at the building where Jake was sleeping. The blast woke everyone up, and alarms began blaring across the facility. Humans stumbled out of their beds, confused and scared, but they were not alone. Rex, Jake's giant shadow maw friend, was the first to react. He roared with a sound that shook the ground and made the Corex soldiers step backward in fear. But Rex did not attack the invaders. Instead, he positioned himself between Jake and the soldiers, protecting his human friend. Other creatures responded the same way. Void stalkers landed from their night flights to stand guard over their human partners. Cloud serpents slithered out of their pools, their usually calm demeanor replaced by protective fury. Even the gentle burrowing titans emerged from underground, their massive bulk forming living shields around the compound. The Corex attack had triggered exactly the opposite of what they expected. Instead of abandoning the humans, the creatures were defending them with fierce loyalty. "Impossible," shouted the Corex commander. "Animals do not fight to protect other species. This proves they are being controlled." But as the battle continued, it became clear that the creatures were not being controlled at all. They made their own decisions about how to fight. The Void Stalkers used aerial tactics that no human had taught them. The Shadow Maws coordinated their attacks in ways that came from their own pack-hunting instincts. The Cloud Serpents used their knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver the armored soldiers. The humans, meanwhile, did not order their friends to attack. Instead, they tried to stop the fighting and protect both their creature partners and the confused Corex soldiers. "Stop shooting," Jake yelled as he ran between Rex and a group of Corex warriors. "Nobody needs to get hurt here." The battle ended when the Corex realized they were completely outmatched. Their advanced weapons and armor meant nothing against creatures that knew the terrain and fought with intelligence and coordination. Worse, the creatures were showing mercy, deliberately avoiding killing blows even when they had clear advantages. Corex retreated to their ships, more confused than defeated. Everything they believed about strength and weakness had been challenged by what they had seen. As news of the attack spread throughout the galaxy, support for the human approach grew stronger. Species that had been uncertain about creature partnerships now saw the loyalty and protection that these relationships could provide. More importantly, they saw that cooperation was not weakness. It was a new kind of strength that made everyone involved more powerful than they could be alone. The galaxy was changing and there was no going back. The age of conquest and fear was ending, replaced by something better. The age of friendship and mutual understanding. On Epsilon Eridani 3, Jake sat with Rex under the stars, both of them tired but unharmed. Around them, humans and creatures worked together to repair the damage from the attack. "What do you think, big guy?" Jake asked his Shadowmaw friend. "Ready to show the galaxy what real strength looks like?" Rex rumbled his agreement, and in that sound was the promise of a future where no one had to face the darkness alone. The great chamber of the Galactic Council had never seen such crowds. Every seat was filled and more beings watched from ships floating outside the space station. Today would decide the future of the galaxy, and everyone wanted to be part of history. Captain Lisa Hayes stood at the center of the room, but she was not alone. Jake Morrison was beside her with Rex, his massive Shadowmaw friend. Dr. Kevin Blake had brought Luna, who was now fully grown and even more impressive than Rex. Commander Helen Wright stood with a young Void Stalker perched on her shoulder like a giant friendly bird. But the most amazing sight was behind them. Representatives from dozens of species stood together with their new creature partners. A Cathera scientist had made friends with a crystal worm that sparkled on her arm like living jewelry. An Aquari trader floated in his water tank next to a cloud serpent that moved through the water like a rainbow-colored ribbon. Even some of the crystal beings had found ways to communicate with Titan beetles, creating partnerships that no one had thought possible. Council leader Morden stood at his massive podium, his tree-like form towering over everyone. His voice carried the weight of thousands of years of galactic history. 3 months ago, Morden began. The Corex Federation attacked our human friends, hoping to prove that creature partnerships were based on lies and mind control. Instead, they proved something else entirely. The great screen behind him filled with images from across the galaxy. On mining worlds, humans and Shadowmaws worked together to extract rare metals while keeping the environment safe. In space, mixed crews of different species traveled together on ships protected by Void Stalker escorts. On farming planets, burrowing, Titans and local farmers created food systems that could feed entire star systems. They proved that cooperation makes everyone stronger. Morden continued. Not just humans and creatures, but all of us. Ambassador Zextar stepped forward, his blue skin shining with pride instead of the fear he had shown months ago. The Vrylon Empire has established 12 new colonies in the past 3 months, he announced. All of them on worlds we once considered too dangerous to settle. Our human partners and their creature friends have made the impossible become routine. Similar reports came from around the galaxy. The Nexari had discovered new crystal formations with the help of creatures that could sense mineral deposits. The Aquari had found underwater cities built by ancient civilizations, guided by sea creatures that had lived there for thousands of years. Even the cautious Kythera had started exploring dangerous cave systems, protected by creatures that could navigate in complete darkness. But the most important change was harder to measure. Fear was disappearing from the galaxy. For centuries, space travel had been dangerous because of unknown creatures and hostile environments. Now, those same creatures were becoming guides and protectors. Planets that had been marked as forbidden were becoming homes to thriving communities. Lisa Hayes stepped forward to address the council. 6 months ago, you asked us to explain how humans could tame the galaxy's most fearful creatures. But we did not tame them. We became their friends. The screen showed new footage from the frontier worlds. On a planet covered in acid oceans, humans worked with creatures that could swim through the deadly water to harvest rare plants used in medicine. On a world with crushing gravity, massive creatures carried human explorers to mountain peaks, where unique crystals grew. These creatures were never our enemies, Lisa continued. They were potential partners waiting for someone to understand them. Humans were just the first species to try. Dr. Kevin Blake joined her at the podium. But we were not the only ones. In the past month, we have seen incredible breakthroughs from other species learning to communicate with creatures in their own ways. The examples were amazing. The Nexari had learned to communicate with crystal-based life forms using light patterns. The Aquari had developed a way to translate the songs of space whales into useful navigation data. The tree-like Verdani had found ways to work with plant-based creatures that could terraform dead worlds in decades instead of centuries. Every species has something unique to offer, Kevin explained. Humans are good at understanding social creatures because we evolved in groups. But other species can connect with different types of life in ways we never could. The presentation continued with live feeds from the newest project that had the whole galaxy excited. On the edge of explored space, human explorers had made contact with creatures the size of small moons. These leviathans of the void had been destroying ships for centuries, but it turned out they were not attacking at all. They were trying to communicate. Jake Morrison appeared on the screen, floating in a special suit next to one of these massive creatures. The leviathan's skin was covered in patterns of light that pulsed in complex rhythms. They are not monsters. Jake's voice came through the speakers. They are artists. These patterns are songs, stories, poems about the beauty of space. They have been trying to share their art with us for thousands of years, but we were too scared to listen. The council chamber fell silent as the Leviathan's light patterns filled the screen. Even without understanding the meaning, everyone could feel the beauty and intelligence behind the display. It was like watching a symphony of light that told the story of the universe itself. Commander Helen Wright stepped forward with her final report. "The disputed zones are now the cooperation zones," she announced. "The last armed conflict ended 2 weeks ago, when we helped the fighting species realize they were both being influenced by creatures that fed on emotional energy. Once we removed the creatures and found them a better food source, the war ended immediately. But the biggest surprise came from an unexpected source. War leader Grixtal of the Corex Federation entered the chamber, but he was not alone. Walking beside him was a creature that looked like a giant armored bear with 6 legs and glowing red eyes. "I have come to apologize," Grixtal announced, his translator making his gruff voice sound almost gentle. "We attacked the humans because we thought they were making us weak, but we learned that we were already weak because we were alone." He gestured to his companion. "This is Stoneheart, a guardian beast from our homeworld. For generations, we hunted these creatures because we saw them as competitors. But when we tried to understand them instead of fighting them, we discovered they wanted to protect us, not fight us." The Corex leader looked around the chamber at all the different species and their creature partners. True strength does not come from standing alone. It comes from standing together. Council leader Morden called for the final vote. The question was simple. Would the Galactic Council officially recognize humans as the first interspecies liaison division, with the mission to help other species find their own creature partnerships? The vote was unanimous. As celebrations erupted throughout the chamber and across the galaxy, Lisa Hayes received a message that made her smile. It was from Earth, where children were learning about the galaxy in schools that now included lessons about creature communication and interspecies friendship. But the message that meant the most came from Jake Morrison, still floating in space next to his new Leviathan friend. "The big guy wants to know if we can arrange a concert," Jake reported. "Apparently there are Leviathans all over the galaxy, and they want to share their music with everyone." Lisa laughed as she imagined concerts in space where creatures the size of cities would perform symphonies of light for audiences of every species in the galaxy. It was the kind of impossible dream that had become possible in this new age of cooperation. The galaxy had changed forever. Fear had been replaced by curiosity. Isolation had been replaced by friendship. And somewhere among the stars, creatures that had been alone for millions of years were finally finding the families they had always wanted. On his mining world, Jake Morrison sat with Rex under the alien constellations, planning their next adventure. There were rumors of singing mountains on a distant planet, and mechanical creatures that built cities in the clouds of gas giants. Each new discovery was a chance to prove that the universe was full of friends waiting to be found. The greatest adventure was just beginning, and for the first time in galactic history, no one had to face it alone. The bond between species had become the bond that held the stars together, and it was stronger than anyone had ever dared to dream.